Freeport, upstate New York, was the kind of town that looked tranquil from a distance, especially when the first true freeze of winter settled in. That night, the temperature had sunk so low that the wind itself felt sharp, almost predatory, whistling through the bare trees and rattling every window in Natalie Barrett's old farmhouse. The digital clock on her stove blinked 12:01 as she refilled her mug with hot tea, one of those lonely rituals that came with living alone at 58, or nearly alone. In the glow of the kitchen light, Ranger's silhouette appeared, broad-shouldered, coat dappled with gray, his old K9 vest still hanging from a hook by the door. He was 12 now, more silver than black, but tonight he was all alertness, ears pricked, head turned toward the back door. At first, Natalie thought it was just the wind that made him growl, but the noise he made, a low, primal rumble, wasn't for the wind. He shifted from foot to foot the way he used to on patrol, nose lifted, body rigid. Natalie's pulse kicked up. "What is it, boy?" she whispered, half expecting him to relax, to nudge her for a treat, to reassure her with that big, patient gaze. Instead, Ranger whined and pawed at the door, his tail high, his focus trained on the field behind the house. Natalie swallowed hard. Ever since she'd lost Tom, her husband, 3 winters ago, nights like these made her question what she was really afraid of, the dark or what it hid. But Ranger didn't doubt. He pressed his nose to the glass, barked once, sharp and guttural. Something was out there. Something was wrong. She reached for her flashlight and her parka, heart thumping. Her fingers trembled as she snapped on Ranger's old collar and leash, the same way she used to when Tom was alive and their world felt safer. She opened the door and the cold hit her like a slap. The sky was an endless black sheet, pierced by hard, unblinking stars. Ranger bolted ahead, dragging her across the yard, paws leaving deep tracks in the snow, every sense tuned to the night. They crossed the frozen garden, the wind slicing through Natalie's coat, her breath steaming in front of her. In the distance, the abandoned barn loomed, a squat, shadowy outline at the edge of her land, unused since the year the last Barrett cow died. Natalie had always told herself she'd board up the doors, but she never did. Tonight, the barn looked like a dark mouth, yawning open, threatening to swallow whatever came near. Ranger let out another bark, pulling so hard on the leash that Natalie nearly lost her grip. She followed, boots crunching through ice, each step feeling like it echoed across the entire field. She caught herself wondering, almost pleading, that she'd find nothing but wind and empty straw inside. But when Ranger reached the barn door, he stopped abruptly, nose pressed to the wood. He scratched, then whined, his tail tucked now, body tense with fear and urgency. Natalie's hands shook. She hesitated, the old barn creaking under the pressure of the wind, imagining every horror story she'd ever heard. Finally, she steeled herself and pushed the door open. The flashlight's beam cut through the darkness, dust motes spiraling in the cold air. Ranger slipped inside first, hackles raised. The scent hit Natalie instantly. Damp straw, rot, something faintly sweet, too sweet. "Hello?" Natalie called, voice cracking. Nothing, just wind moaning through broken boards. Then Ranger stopped at a heap of straw near the back wall, barking twice before dropping to his haunches, tail rigid. Natalie stumbled forward, the beam trembling in her hand. At first, all she saw was a flash of pink, half buried under hay. Then, a tiny foot, a small, dirt-streaked hand. Natalie's breath caught as she knelt. There, curled up and shivering, was a little girl. Maybe 6, maybe 7. It was hard to tell. Her dress was torn, her lips blue, her eyes fluttering between sleep and something far worse. Natalie's whole body went cold, and she felt a flash of panic, memory colliding with the present. The face of her own daughter, gone so many years now, superimposed on this child's. "Hey, sweetheart, it's okay," Natalie murmured, voice trembling. The girl didn't respond, barely seemed to register her. Ranger pressed close, sniffing gently, whining low in his throat. For a second, the girl's eyes flickered toward the dog, then shut again. Natalie's hands moved on autopilot, checking for a pulse, brushing straw from the child's face. Her skin was icy, her breath shallow. She was alive, but barely. "Hold on," Natalie whispered, more to herself than to the girl. "Please, just hold on." She fumbled for her phone, dialing 911 with shaking fingers. Ranger nudged the child, his tongue gently brushing her cheek as if willing her to wake up. The dispatcher's voice was distant, metallic, but Natalie managed to give her address, her voice breaking as she described the scene. She cradled the girl close, wrapping her in her coat. Ranger pressed against both of them like a living shield. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the barn doors. Natalie stared into the dark, the weight of every what-if crushing her. What had happened here? Who was this child? Was she running from something or someone? Ranger looked up at Natalie, his eyes clear and urgent. Whatever this night held, they'd face it together. The hospital's fluorescent lights were harsh and sterile, a jarring contrast to the dark, frozen world Natalie had just crossed. By the time her pickup fishtailed into the ER drop-off, the little girl was swaddled in every blanket Natalie had, but still trembled in her arms. Ranger leapt from the back seat the moment the doors swung open, refusing to leave her side. Snow clung to Natalie's boots as she stumbled through the automatic doors, calling out for help, her voice hoarse and desperate, echoing in ways she thought she'd never hear again. Nurses came running, voices clipped and efficient. "Possible hypothermia, pediatric," one called, signaling the urgency. Natalie hovered, torn between giving the child over and refusing to let go, her grip tightening with a kind of primal protectiveness. The girl's head lolled, eyes flickering open just long enough to see Ranger at her feet before shutting again. "Ma'am, you have to let us—" a nurse started, but Ranger blocked her path, stance rigid, teeth bared just enough to say, "Not yet." The staff froze, startled by the growling, but Natalie pressed her hand gently to Ranger's neck, her own voice low. "Easy, Ranger. She's safe now." "Let them help." The canine's posture softened, tail drooping, but he wouldn't leave the girl's side. Together they watched as the team transferred her to a gurney, wires and monitors blooming over her tiny chest, heated blankets layered over her shivering form. Natalie was ushered out to the waiting area, but she stood firm, arms crossed, fear and adrenaline pumping. She flashed her Army nurse's badge, the one she hadn't needed in years, and it seemed to buy her a little leeway, just enough to hover in the corridor, watching every move. She caught flashes of her own past with every beep of the monitors, the sterile rooms, the frantic nights she'd spent waiting for news of her daughter, Leah, so many years ago. She'd lost Leah in a car accident a lifetime ago, but tonight, the wound felt fresh, raw. Natalie squeezed her eyes shut, fighting the memory, fighting the ache in her chest. Minutes stretched into an hour. Doctor Marcus Bell, a tall, steady-handed pediatrician with graying temples, arrived with a team. "Vitals are unstable. She's dehydrated, cold to the core, and showing signs of recent trauma," he said, voice steady but urgent. "Does anyone know her name?" Natalie shook her head, her jaw clenched. "She hasn't spoken. Found her in my barn." Her gaze flicked to Ranger, who paced, ears back, anxiety radiating from every line of his body. The girl's eyelids fluttered, lashes dark against skin gone too pale. Ranger crept closer, nose twitching. He placed a paw gently on the hospital bed's rail and whined, low and soft. For a second, the girl's hand twitched. Ranger nuzzled her fingers, licking them once, gentle, coaxing, as if willing her to come back. The monitor beeped, the girl's heart rate rising just a tick. Dr. Bell exchanged a glance with Natalie, a spark of hope there. "Sometimes animals reach them when we can't," he said quietly. The child's hand closed around a tuft of Ranger's fur, so tight that it took effort for the nurse to get a temperature reading. Ranger settled at the foot of the bed, eyes never leaving her face. Natalie sat, shoulders hunched, feeling the exhaustion sink into her bones. Dr. Bell handed her a paper cup of coffee. "You look like you need this more than I do," he said, voice softening. "We'll need her name when she's ready." Hours ticked by. Natalie drifted between the waiting area and the edge of the child's room, always within sight of Ranger, who refused to budge except to nose her hand when she looked lost. A nurse set a fresh blanket on Natalie's shoulders. "She's holding on," the woman murmured, not needing to say more. The first rays of dawn crept through the frosted hospital windows when the girl finally opened her eyes. They were gray, clouded, wide, rimmed with fear. She saw Ranger first, her hand tightening in his fur. "Safe," she whispered, barely more than a breath. Natalie crouched by the bedside, blinking away tears. "Hey there, sweetheart. You're safe now. My name's Natalie. This is Ranger. What's your name?" The girl's lips parted, but no sound came out. She shrank back against the pillow, trembling, gaze darting to the door as if expecting someone terrible to walk in. Ranger nudged her wrist, tail thumping gently. A nurse approached with a clipboard, her voice a little too bright. "We'd like to call your family, honey. Can you tell us your name?" The girl squeezed her eyes shut, face twisting. Don't let her find me, she choked out, voice tiny but desperate. Natalie felt her heart stutter. We won't, she promised, not sure who her was, but knowing terror when she heard it. You're safe, I swear. Ranger climbed onto the bed, just enough for the girl to bury her face in his neck. His calm, gentle breathing seemed to anchor her, slow her panic. Natalie caught the nurse's eye, shaking her head. Give her time. The hospital called the sheriff's department, and soon Deputy Harper Quinn appeared, notepad in hand. She crouched to eye level with the girl, softening her voice, but Maddie, because that was what she finally whispered, wouldn't speak further, only clutching Ranger and staring out the window. Natalie stepped into the hallway, rubbing her arms, fighting the urge to break down. Dr. Bell approached, his expression grave but not unkind. Whatever happened to her, it was bad. She trusts Ranger, and that's a start. Natalie nodded, her mind flashing back to Leah's small hand in hers, the memory of a promise she couldn't keep. She swore to herself, not this time. Back in the room, the girl, Maddie now, was starting to thaw. Ranger pressed his head into her side, whimpering when she flinched at loud noises, licking her fingers when her eyes filled with tears. Natalie stayed close, watching as the medical team ran tests and whispered about bruises, about things that didn't add up. She kept her promise, answering every question with a steady voice, offering Maddie small comforts, a cup of cocoa, a story about Ranger's days as a hero dog. Through it all, Maddie said little, only once glancing at Natalie and whispering again, "Don't let her find me, please." Natalie squeezed her hand, and Ranger placed his paw over both of theirs, sealing the silent pact. No one knew yet what kind of storm had deposited Maddie at Natalie's door, or how much danger still lingered in its wake. But the ice was broken, just a little. The girl had a name now. Ranger watched over her, never blinking. And somewhere out there, Natalie realized someone was looking for this child, someone who would do anything to keep her silent. Natalie's heart hardened with resolve. She would not fail Maddie, not like she failed before. It was the third morning since the rescue. The storm had blown out, but in Freeport Memorial Hospital's pediatric recovery wing, a quieter kind of storm lingered. A tension Natalie felt in her chest every time she stepped into Maddie's room. The walls hummed with soft beeps, drifting shadows from the trees outside, and the ever-present scent of antiseptic. Natalie had slept in the same stiff armchair beside Maddie's bed each night, a blanket bunched around her shoulders, boots lined up beneath her. She only left the room when absolutely necessary. Ranger never left at all. In the pale blue dawn, Maddie curled into herself beneath the hospital blanket, one fist clutching Ranger's thick fur, her breath even but troubled. The little girl barely spoke, but in sleep her face would sometimes twist, her body tensing as if bracing against blows only she could see. Natalie sat with her, coffee cooling in her hands, watching and waiting, heart aching with questions. Sometimes she caught herself tracing the child's cheek with her eyes, searching for similarities, for hints of her own daughter's face. Leah would be 26 now, a fact Natalie could barely hold in her mind. Grief had a way of circling back, sudden and sharp, when least expected. She found herself fighting the urge to hold Maddie close, to protect her in all the ways she hadn't managed for Leah. The guilt was never far. A nurse slipped in, gentle and practiced, to check Maddie's vitals. "She's improving, thanks to you," the woman whispered, laying a comforting hand on Natalie's shoulder. But Natalie wasn't convinced. What if this wasn't enough? What if the real damage, the kind that didn't show on X-rays, never healed? As the sun climbed, the world beyond the window seemed to move on. Ambulances came and went, staff bustled in the halls, families visited and left with balloons and stuffed bears. But for Maddie, the world had shrunk to 4 pale walls, a single bed, and the steady presence of Ranger. Even Natalie's voice was just background noise most of the time, something the girl tolerated but rarely met with eye contact. Natalie tried everything, reading storybooks in a soft, steady voice, sketching animals on scrap paper and leaving them where Maddie could see. She baked chocolate chip cookies in the hospital's tiny staff kitchen, slipping warm, gooey pieces onto a napkin by the bedside. Sometimes Maddie took them, sometimes not. It was Ranger who made the difference. When the girl shivered or whimpered in her sleep, Ranger would press his head against her, his weight anchoring her to the present. If a door slammed or a monitor beeped too loud, he would hop onto the mattress, tucking himself along her side, tail wagging, eyes soft and patient. Slowly, Maddie began to open up, but only to him. Sometimes Natalie would hear a whisper, barely more than breath, as Maddie spoke into Ranger's ear. Secret fears, snatches of song, words that sounded like prayers. Ranger listened, motionless, as if understanding every syllable. Natalie could only guess at what Maddie was sharing, about shadows, about being cold and alone, about someone who might still be looking for her. The girl refused to talk to the counselors, the nurses, or even Dr. Bell, who always tried his gentlest tone. To everyone but Ranger, Maddie was a ghost. One afternoon, a hospital social worker named Shelley arrived, her approach gentle but firm. She brought coloring books, soft dolls, and an easy smile. "You like dogs, Maddie?" she asked, kneeling beside the bed. Maddie didn't answer, but she didn't let go of Ranger either. Shelley set a bag on the bedside table. "We found your backpack in the barn, honey. Want to look through it together?" For a long moment, Maddie stared at the bag. Then, wordlessly, she reached out, her fingers trembling. Natalie watched as Shelley unzipped the worn fabric. Inside were battered school books, a few mismatched socks, and a stuffed fox with one eye missing. Tucked in the front pocket was a folded piece of lined paper, worn soft by handling. Shelley glanced at Natalie, silent question in her eyes. Natalie nodded, her own throat tight. Maddie's hands closed around the fox, squeezing it so hard her knuckles went white. Then she unfolded the paper, tracing her fingers over the handwriting. For a long time, no one spoke. Finally, Maddie whispered, "It's for Daddy." Shelley read it quietly, her eyes gentle. The letter was short, simple. "Dear Daddy, I miss you. Mommy is gone. Please come home. Love, Maddie." Natalie swallowed hard, blinking away tears. She recognized the heartbreak in those words, a child lost, reaching for someone who wasn't there. Ranger nuzzled Maddie's arm, letting her bury her face in his coat. That night, after Maddie finally drifted into sleep, Natalie sat with Dr. Bell outside the room, voices low. "She's safe for now," Dr. Bell said. "But it'll take more than stitches and soup to bring her back. She trusts Ranger more than anyone. Sometimes animals are the bridge to the world we can't reach." Natalie nodded, a familiar ache blooming in her chest. "I keep thinking, maybe if I'd done more, Leah would still be—" She caught herself, pressing her palm to her eyes. Dr. Bell let her sit with it. "You're doing something now. That's what matters." Inside the room, Maddie woke from a nightmare, sobbing into Ranger's neck. Natalie rushed in, smoothing her hair, humming softly until the tremors faded. "I'm here," she promised, over and over, until Maddie finally clung to her hand. Later, as rain tapped the windows, Maddie whispered to Ranger, "Don't let me go. Promise?" Ranger licked her face in answer, tail thumping softly against the sheets. Natalie watched, her heart torn open, feeling both the weight of her failures and a glimmer of hope, one she hadn't dared feel in years. Before sunrise, Natalie found herself praying, for Maddie, for the father in the letter, for the courage to keep trying. Ranger watched her, his eyes dark and steady, as if promising her too. The hospital settled into silence, but inside Maddie's room something new had taken root. Trust, fragile and bright. And though the storm outside had passed, the one inside, Natalie knew, was only beginning to clear. The hospital quieted at night in ways the day never could. Hushed voices, the glow of monitors blinking in the dim, footsteps echoing down long hallways. In room 212, Natalie learned to listen not just with her ears, but with her presence. Maddie lay in the twin cone of lamplight and Ranger's shadow, her face turned to the wall, the stuffed fox nestled under her chin. She hadn't spoken to any grown-up since the letter, but tonight, as sleet whispered at the window, something inside her seemed to thaw. Ranger shifted on the bed, sighing. His body curled around Maddie, tail flicking whenever she twitched in her sleep. Natalie sat in her usual chair, book in her lap, not reading. Instead, she watched Maddie's small back rise and fall, remembering Leah's feverish nights and how helpless she'd felt, wishing she could turn her love into a shield. At midnight, Maddie woke, gasping, caught in a half-dream. Her hand scrambled for Ranger's collar, gripping tight. "Don't go," she whispered, so soft Natalie almost missed it. Ranger nuzzled her cheek, steady and warm. Maddie's breathing slowed. She turned, face damp with tears, meeting Natalie's gaze for the first time that day. Can I tell you something?" she whispered, voice thin as tissue. Natalie nodded, moving to the bed, careful not to crowd her. Anything, honey. I'm right here. Maddie stroked the dog's ear, her words halting. My daddy's far away. He's a soldier. He said he'd come home soon. But my mom died last year. After that, my stepmom, Janice, she... Maddie's voice trailed off, her eyes skittering away. Ranger whimpered, laying his big head on her chest. Maddie clung tighter, as if the dog alone could keep her anchored. Natalie kept her expression calm, heart pounding. It's okay to tell me, she said softly, refusing to fill the silence with platitudes. She got mad a lot, broke my things, locked me in my room. When she drank, Maddie looked at her hands. Sometimes she forgot to feed me. Her voice shook, the pain raw and old at once. Natalie felt the urge to reach for Maddie, but instead set her hand on the blanket, an invitation, not a command. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. None of that is your fault. Maddie nodded, staring at Ranger's ear. She drove me somewhere. I don't remember. It was cold. She said Daddy wasn't coming back. I heard tires, then nothing. I woke up in the barn. Ranger found me. Her voice cracked, but she didn't cry. There weren't enough tears left. Natalie's mind reeled, her army training sifting through the details. Abandonment, neglect, emotional trauma. She tried to steady herself, for Maddie's sake. You're safe now, I promise. Just then, Dr. Bell knocked, voice gentle. May I come in? Maddie nodded. Ranger watched the doctor, tail thumping once. He'd accepted Dr. Bell as part of the pack. The pediatrician perched on the windowsill, not intruding. How are you feeling tonight, Maddie? Better with Ranger, she said, voice almost shy. He doesn't get scared. Dr. Bell smiled. Sometimes dogs know how to help when we don't. He turned to Natalie. We've got some news from the police. They found fresh tire tracks near your barn and a note tucked in Maddie's backpack. It matches Janice's handwriting. Her stepmother's car was abandoned at a bus station. Natalie's jaw tightened. So she left her on purpose. She's still out there. Maddie flinched. Will she come back? Natalie shook her head, voice unwavering. We won't let anyone hurt you again. She caught Dr. Bell's eye, a silent plea for reassurance. We're working with the sheriff, Dr. Bell said gently. But healing will take time. You've both been through a lot. Natalie pressed her palm to Maddie's, feeling the tremor in the girl's fingers. I'm not going anywhere. I lost my own little girl a long time ago. I didn't get to save her. But I'm here for you now. We all are. Me, Dr. Bell, Ranger. For the first time, Maddie looked directly at Natalie, her eyes fierce and bright. Promise? Promise, Natalie whispered. The three of them, child, dog, and woman, sat in the quiet room, shadows pooling in corners, pain shared and diluted by presence. Dr. Bell lingered, voice low as he spoke to Natalie later in the hallway. You're doing more than you know. Trauma like this. The wounds are invisible, but they heal in the smallest moments. Let her set the pace. Animals are sometimes the best therapists. Natalie nodded, remembering Leah's last words, how she'd begged her mother to stay. She'd failed once. She would not fail Maddie. I can't lose her too, she admitted, voice ragged. You won't, Dr. Bell promised. But you have to let yourself heal too. That night, in the hospital kitchen, Natalie stared at her reflection in the microwave door. Her face looked older, drawn, but there was something else. A stubbornness, a quiet resolve she thought she'd lost after Leah. Maybe Maddie was giving her a second chance at grace. Back in the room, Maddie had drifted to sleep, hand tangled in Ranger's collar, the stuffed fox tucked close. Ranger's eyes glinted in the low light, steady as a sentry. As Natalie settled in the chair, exhaustion bone deep, she whispered to Ranger, Don't let me give up, okay? The old dog thumped his tail against the mattress as if he understood. Outside, sleet turned to snow, blanketing the world in silence. Inside, hope, small, flickering, took root among the scars. Natalie promised herself she would not let fear or grief win, and if she ever doubted, she'd look at Maddie, at Ranger, and remember, even in the darkest hour, they'd found each other. The next morning, the storm had passed but left Freeport shivering under a brittle sun, its streets rimmed in ice, gutters glittering like jagged glass. The world outside the hospital felt stark and exposed, and so did Natalie, moving through the day with Maddie's story still fresh in her mind. Sleep had been shallow, interrupted by Ranger's quiet pacing and Maddie's restless dreams. Natalie dressed in the same jeans and flannel, her badge clipped on, the army discipline of her past surfacing with every purposeful step. She found Maddie curled up with Ranger, the dog's head nestled under the girl's chin, his breathing slow and protective. Maddie clung to him, even as Natalie gently coaxed her awake with promises of pancakes and a morning walk. Only Ranger's quiet nudge persuaded Maddie to get up, clutching her stuffed fox with one hand and Ranger's leash with the other. Downstairs, Deputy Harper Quinn stood waiting in the lobby, a sharp-eyed woman in her late 30s with the kind of tired confidence that comes from chasing down more than a few cold cases. She greeted Natalie with a nod, gaze flicking to Maddie, then Ranger. "We're ready to start looking into what happened, Ms. Barrett. If Maddie's up for it, I'd like to visit the house. Ranger can come too. Sometimes he finds what humans miss." Natalie nodded, fighting back nerves. Maddie pressed close to her, wide-eyed but silent. Her body tensed as the deputy led them out to the patrol car. Ranger hopped in first, tail wagging, as if reassuring Maddie by example. Natalie squeezed Maddie's shoulder, whispering, "We'll stick together. No one's taking you anywhere you don't want to go." They drove in near silence, the town passing by in a blur. Frozen fields, snow-caked roofs, the old water tower looming over Freeport like a watchful guardian. As they pulled up in front of Maddie's old house, a squat, gray structure sagging at the edge of town, Natalie felt a chill run through her, colder than any wind. Something about the place felt wrong, neglected, haunted. Deputy Quinn took the lead, notebook ready, her tone gentle but businesslike. "We're going to look around. Maddie, you don't have to talk if you don't want to. Just stay close." Maddie nodded, lips pressed tight. Ranger took point, sniffing the ground, his movements deliberate. Inside, the house was colder than the world outside. Shadows pooled in corners, the air thick with dust and neglect. Ranger moved ahead, nose twitching as he padded from room to room. Natalie trailed behind, her gaze flicking from battered furniture to a wall of family photos, some old, some new, some with faces torn away. Maddie's picture appeared twice, once as a smiling toddler between her parents, and again, alone, standing beside a Christmas tree, eyes wary and distant. Ranger paused at the doorway to Maddie's bedroom. He sniffed the edge of the rug, then pawed at a small, discolored patch near the closet. Deputy Quinn crouched down, gently pulling back the rug. Beneath it, a faint stain bloomed across the floorboards, surrounded by scattered toys and a single shoe, muddy and forgotten. Natalie's stomach clenched. Maddie hovered at the threshold, frozen. "That's where Janice locked me in," Maddie whispered, so quietly Natalie almost missed it. "She got mad when I cried." Deputy Quinn's face hardened. She carefully photographed the scene, then moved to the closet, finding long scratches on the inside of the door. Marks left by tiny fingernails, desperate to escape. Maddie flinched, clutching Ranger tighter. "We'll need to document everything," Quinn said, voice gentle but firm. "This isn't just neglect, it's abuse." Her words settled over the room like dust. Natalie moved through the house, her army instincts taking over. In the kitchen, she found a pile of unopened mail, bills marked overdue, and a half-empty bottle of cheap gin. The fridge held little more than expired milk and a bag of carrots gone to rot. In the bathroom, more signs. Child-sized bruises hidden beneath sleeves, long healed but never forgotten. Natalie's anger rose, mixing with helplessness. She snapped photos, cataloging the evidence. Ranger pressed against Maddie's side, his presence the only anchor in a world that had spun too far. Outside, Deputy Quinn radioed the sheriff's office, her voice clipped. "We've got clear signs of long-term neglect and physical abuse. Going to need child services out here, and we'll want to search for the stepmother, Janice Doyle." Back in the patrol car, Maddie was silent, her eyes hollow. Ranger climbed onto the seat beside her, resting his head on her lap. Maddie stroked his fur, whispering into his ear. Natalie squeezed Maddie's hand, wishing she could promise things would get better, but knowing too well that justice, even when swift, could never erase what had happened here. At the station, Sheriff Duncan, a gruff man with a heart buried under layers of cynicism, sat behind his desk, reviewing evidence. The car was found abandoned at the bus station out by the highway, he told Natalie and Deputy Quinn. Maddie's backpack was inside. No sign of Janice Doyle. Looks like she dumped everything and ran. Natalie exchanged a glance with Quinn. So she left Maddie to die, then tried to disappear. The sheriff nodded grimly. We'll put out an alert, but if she's got a head start, we'll do everything we can. Dr. Bell checked in by phone, his voice steady but concerned. Maddie's panicking every time she hears a stranger. Try to keep her with Ranger as much as possible. And Natalie, you're the only adult she trusts right now. That matters. As evening fell, Natalie sat on the hospital bed with Maddie, holding her while Ranger lay curled at their feet. The little girl's eyes were red-rimmed, but she no longer flinched at every sound. Will she come back? Maddie asked, voice small. Natalie brushed hair from her eyes. No one will let her hurt you again. I promise. For the first time, Maddie seemed to believe it. She leaned into Natalie, her trust a fragile gift, hard-won and precious. Ranger thumped his tail as if sealing the promise. Outside, the winter night pressed in, but inside, where trust, pain, and hope mingled, Natalie realized the fight for Maddie's future had only just begun, and this time she would not let the shadows win. Freeport County Courthouse was a plain brick building, perched on Main Street between a shuttered bakery and a flagpole tangled with last fall's leaves. It had never hosted anything resembling national drama, mostly traffic tickets, small-town disputes, and the occasional bar fight. But on the morning of Maddie's custody hearing, the air around it felt electric, as if the whole town were holding its breath. Natalie arrived early, Maddie's tiny hand cradled in her own, Ranger at their side with a blue therapy dog vest velcroed tight to his chest. He walked with Maddie up the courthouse steps, steady as a heartbeat, ignoring the curious stares and the camera phones held by neighbors who'd heard rumors, but never really believed them. Maddie was pale, clutching her battered fox and glancing anxiously at every stranger in the corridor, but she didn't let go of Ranger even for a second. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with a low hum, lawyers conferring, social workers checking files, the bailiff's boots echoing on the tile. At the front, Judge Ramirez, a severe woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair pulled into a no-nonsense knot, looked over the bench, her eyes sharp as frost. Then Janice Doyle walked in. She wore a crisp black suit, her hair perfect, her face blank. She looked straight through Maddie as if she were a stranger, then leaned into her lawyer, whispering something with a practiced, bitter smile. Natalie felt her blood chill. Janice's presence was a cold wind across old wounds. For a moment, Maddie shrank back, fingers trembling on Ranger's fur. Janice's attorney, slick, young, all confidence, stood and announced, Your Honor, my client is here to contest the removal of her stepdaughter from her legal care. She was under great stress, yes, but my client loves Maddie and is being unfairly targeted. Judge Ramirez didn't blink. We'll hear testimony, but this is not about blame. It's about Maddie's welfare. Let's begin. First up was Deputy Harper Quinn, who methodically recounted the evidence. Forced entry marks, neglected rooms, locked closets, hidden bruises, Maddie's backpack dumped in Janice's abandoned car at the bus station. Each fact weighed down the room like lead. Dr. Bell took the stand next. His voice was measured but laced with anger as he described Maddie's medical condition: hypothermia, malnutrition, old and new bruises, classic signs of ongoing abuse. He finished quietly. She wouldn't let any of us touch her, except for Ranger and Natalie. Trauma that deep doesn't come from a single bad night. Janice's attorney objected, insisted on cross-examination, tried to cast doubt on the hospital records. Dr. Bell didn't flinch. Natalie was called next. Her mouth went dry as she stood, the familiar old fear rising, the same panic she'd felt after Leah's accident, the same helplessness that had threatened to drown her all those years ago. But as she looked down at Maddie, who was tracing circles on Ranger's fur, Natalie felt the weight of every day she'd spent fighting to keep this child safe. She raised her right hand, swore to tell the truth, and did. She spoke about the freezing night in the barn, about the terror in Maddie's eyes, about Ranger's refusal to leave her side. She described the battered backpack, the letter to Maddie's father, the silent ways Maddie had reached out for comfort. She fought to keep her voice steady, but when she talked about Leah, about losing her, about the second chance Maddie had given her, her throat closed up. The judge leaned forward. listening closely. "You have no legal obligation to this child, Miss Barrett. Why did you get involved?" Natalie's answer came from somewhere deep, raw. "Because I couldn't look away again. Because she needed someone. Because she's just a little girl." As she stepped down, Maddie's turn came. The courtroom fell so silent that the tick of the judge's pen was loud as rain. Ranger hopped up onto the witness stand beside Maddie, his broad head resting on her lap. The bailiff made no move to stop him. Everyone could see the trembling in Maddie's small body. The child clung to Ranger, looking at Natalie for courage, then spoke in a voice barely louder than a whisper. "Ranger saved me," she said. "He found me in the barn. He stayed with me. He made me feel safe." Janice's lawyer tried to press Maddie, but each question wilted under the weight of the child's silence. She would only answer when Ranger's tail brushed her leg, or when Natalie mouthed silent encouragement from the gallery. After a few minutes, the judge raised a hand, signaling enough. At last, Janice was called. She sat with arms folded, her words rehearsed and cold. "It was a misunderstanding. I was overwhelmed. Maddie's a difficult child." Her voice lacked conviction, her eyes darting to the exit as if calculating her chances. After a tense recess, the judge returned and gave her ruling. "The evidence of neglect, abandonment, and abuse is overwhelming. Miss Doyle, your rights are hereby terminated. Maddie will remain in the temporary care of Natalie Barrett, pending review by Child Protective Services and her father's return." A hush fell. Maddie turned, searching for Natalie, and when Natalie opened her arms, the little girl ran into them, sobbing with relief. Ranger barked once, a sharp, triumphant sound that echoed through the emptying courtroom. As Natalie held Maddie, Judge Ramirez added, voice softer now, "Ms. Barrett, you did something rare. You listened. Don't underestimate the power of that." Janice was led from the courtroom, her expression blank. Natalie caught her eye for a split second, a look that held nothing but emptiness. Back in the corridor, Dr. Bell and Deputy Quinn congratulated Natalie, but she barely heard them. She was too busy holding Maddie, who clung to her with desperate strength. For the first time, Natalie let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she hadn't failed after all. She looked at Ranger, whose tail thumped on the tile, and mouthed, "Thank you." Ranger just gazed back, steady and wise, as if to say, "You both saved each other." Spring in Freeport was slow to arrive, but when it did, it came with a rush. Green buds along the maples, icy puddles shrinking in the sun, the air full of mud and new beginnings. Natalie could feel the change in her bones. Every morning brought birdsong and the scent of thawing earth through the open windows of her old farmhouse, mixing with the smells of coffee and warm bread. Maddie had started to sleep through the night. Ranger lounged in pools of sunlight, his face relaxed, his nose twitching at dreams. But beneath it all, a nervous current ran through the house. Natalie caught herself listening for the phone every hour, waiting for news, holding her breath for the moment when Maddie's father would call. It finally came one bright April morning. The number was unfamiliar, the voice on the line rough with fatigue and hope. "This is David Doyle. I got your letters. Is Maddie all right?" Natalie felt the world spin. "She's safe. She asks about you every day." Are you coming home?" There was a pause, a muffled sob. "I'm on a transport now. Can you meet me at the airport?" Natalie barely remembered the drive. Maddie was too anxious to speak. She simply pressed her face against Ranger's shoulder as the truck wound its way out of Freeport, past muddy fields and billboards, to the small, glassy terminal where David's plane would land. The arrival lounge was crowded with families, soldiers in uniform, the sharp smell of coffee and anticipation. Maddie's hands twisted the battered fox until its fur nearly split. Ranger, sensing the tension, sat at her feet, tail sweeping the floor in slow, reassuring arcs. Natalie saw him first, a tall, sunburnt man in desert fatigues, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, his face lined with worry and exhaustion. He looked so much older than the man in the family photos. For a long moment, he simply stood in the doorway, scanning the crowd. When his eyes landed on Maddie, he froze, as if afraid to move and break the spell. Maddie stared back, uncertain, caught between fear and longing. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Ranger gave a soft bark, a sound of encouragement, of urgency, of hope, and Maddie broke into a run, feet pounding across the tiled floor, the fox dangling from her hand. "Daddy!" David dropped his bag, arms wide. She crashed into him, sobbing so hard she couldn't speak, clutching his neck as if afraid he'd vanish. For a long time, they simply held each other, both shaking, both laughing and crying at once. Natalie stood back, throat tight, watching the reunion she'd feared might never come. David knelt down, tears running openly now. "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so, so sorry. I never meant to leave you. I tried. I tried so hard to get back." Maddie pressed her face into his shoulder, and Ranger sat beside them, his presence grounding, his tail thumping with approval. Natalie waited as long as she could, then approached quietly. David rose, still clutching Maddie, and held out a trembling hand. "Ms. Barrett, I don't even know how to thank you." Natalie shook his hand, surprised by the strength of his grip. "You don't need to. Maddie saved me as much as I saved her." David crouched and gathered Ranger in a bear hug, whispering, "Thank you, old boy. Thank you." The big dog licked his face, accepting the thanks with the patience of someone who's seen far too much. They rode home together, Maddie glued to her father's side, her laughter breaking through the car's silence like sun after rain. But Natalie sensed the tension simmering underneath. David's guilt, Maddie's fear that all of this might be a dream. Later that afternoon, as the sun lowered over the muddy fields, they all sat around Natalie's kitchen table. David explained haltingly how Janice had hidden Maddie's letters, how he'd believed they were safe until the army chaplain brought him news from Freeport. His anger and heartbreak were raw, edged with regret. "I should have known. I should have fought harder." His hands shook. "I left you behind, Maddie." She shook her head fiercely. "You came back." David's eyes softened. "I'm here now. I won't leave again. I promise." That night, Natalie watched as Maddie fell asleep curled between Ranger and her father, a look of peace on her face she hadn't seen since the rescue. David sat beside Natalie in the darkened living room, his voice raw. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you. You saved my world." Natalie reached over, squeezing his hand, both of them blinking away tears. "Just be here. That's all any of us can do." From the hallway, Maddie's voice drifted, soft, almost a secret. "Now you can rest, Ranger." "Daddy's here." Ranger opened one eye, thumped his tail, and let out a sigh as if agreeing, his vigil finally a little lighter. The next morning, David surprised Natalie as she poured coffee. "I'm not taking Maddie away," he said quietly. "She needs you, both of you. We're going to stay here, if that's all right. I want her to heal, and I want to help." Natalie could only nod, the emotion rising so swiftly she had to set her mug down before it spilled. For the first time since Leah, the old house felt full of hope, of love, of family. Outside, the first daffodils pushed through the melting snow. Maddie giggled as she and Ranger chased each other across the muddy yard, David cheering them on, sunlight tangled in their laughter. Natalie watched from the porch, arms crossed, heart wide open to whatever came next. Freeport had always felt small to Natalie, but that spring and summer it seemed to grow around her, swelling with possibility, warmth, and for the first time in years the laughter of a child in her house. The seasons shifted gently, and Natalie's life filled with the rhythms of family, school mornings, shared dinners, chores done with music in the background, and sunlight spilling through open windows. The air was fragrant with new grass and grilling burgers, and in every corner of their days there was Ranger, watchful, steady, a thread binding them together. It started simply. David rented a room in town at first, but he spent every evening at the farmhouse, helping Maddie with math homework or patching the sagging barn roof while Natalie cooked or tended her vegetable patch. Maddie, whose nightmares had slowly given way to dreams, played on the porch, her laughter ringing across the fields as she tossed sticks for Ranger, who leaped and bounded as if he were a puppy again. Ranger became Maddie's shadow, padding beside her to the school bus every morning and waiting at the end of the driveway each afternoon. Even on hard days, when Maddie came home silent, her backpack tight across her shoulders, her eyes haunted by memories she couldn't quite shake, Ranger knew what to do. He'd nuzzle her, curl around her legs, or coax her into a game of tug-of-war until the tension melted. Therapy sessions at Dr. Bell's office became a new routine. Maddie was quiet at first, but she always let Ranger come with her. The big dog sprawled at her feet as she spoke in small, halting sentences about the darkness she'd known and the safety she felt now. Dr. Bell called Ranger the best medicine in the world, and even David, tough, pragmatic, never one for sentiment, couldn't argue. At home, Natalie and Maddie planted a garden together, turning the hard spring soil with trowels and bare hands. "These need patience," Natalie said, showing Maddie how to press seeds into the earth. "You don't see anything at first, but if you care for them, they'll surprise you." Maddie took the lesson to heart. She named each tomato and carrot and checked on them daily, sometimes whispering secrets to Ranger in the shade of the fence. Evenings became a ritual of healing. They cooked together, David at the grill and Natalie at the stove, Maddie mixing lemonade or tossing salad for the table. Some nights they picnicked outside, fireflies blinking, Ranger curled at Maddie's side as she drifted into sleep beneath the stars. On weekends, the four of them took drives to the lake or visited the county fair, Maddie's face painted with a careful rainbow and a blue ribbon tied to Ranger's collar. There were setbacks. Sometimes Maddie startled at loud noises or lost her words to panic when a stranger asked her name. Sometimes David, despite his efforts, retreated into himself, haunted by guilt and old wounds. But those moments were fewer, and each time Natalie saw them through, by listening, by waiting, by sitting close with a gentle hand on Maddie's back, or a cup of coffee shared with David on the porch at midnight. One golden July afternoon, Natalie found Maddie in the backyard, weaving a crown of dandelions for Ranger, who sat patiently as she looped the stems around his ears. "You're the king of dogs," she declared, and for the first time in a long while, Natalie heard her laugh ring out without hesitation or fear. It was a small moment, but it landed deep. Later that week, the court finalized the new arrangement. Natalie and David stood side by side in Judge Ramirez's office, Maddie fidgeting with her stuffed fox, Ranger at her feet. The judge's smile was softer than Natalie remembered from the hearing. "You've created a safe, loving environment for Maddie," she said, signing the documents with a flourish. "Effective immediately, you two are joint guardians. Maddie, do you have anything you want to say?" Maddie looked up, her eyes bright. She glanced at Natalie, then David. "Can I call you Nana?" she whispered, voice trembling with hope. Natalie couldn't answer at first. Tears blurred her vision as she knelt, arms open, and Maddie ran into them, holding tight. David rested his hand on both their shoulders, silent and proud. Ranger wagged his tail, the dandelion crown sliding over one ear. That evening, they celebrated the only way that felt right. Together, around Natalie's battered old table, plates heaped with sweet corn and barbecue. Maddie set an extra napkin for Ranger, slipping him bits of meat when she thought the adults weren't watching. Later, as dusk fell and fireflies gathered, they sat on the porch in easy silence. Natalie watched Maddie chase Ranger across the yard, the dog's bark sharp and joyful, the girl's laughter clear and high. The ache of loss and regret that had haunted Natalie for so long felt lighter now, replaced by something fierce and bright. She had found family again, not by searching, but by opening her heart, by listening, by showing up, by refusing to turn away. As Maddie climbed onto Natalie's lap, sleep-heavy and content, Natalie pressed a kiss to her hair. "I love you, sweetheart. More than you'll ever know." Maddie smiled, eyes fluttering closed. "Love you too, Nana." Ranger settled at their feet, the night quiet and full, as if the whole world were holding its breath for a new beginning. By late spring, Freeport felt transformed. Banners fluttered along Main Street, shop windows were painted with tulips and rainbows, and everywhere the signs of renewal hung in the air. Word of Maddie's rescue and Ranger's heroism had spread through town. People Natalie barely knew would stop her in the grocery store, squeezing her hand, asking after Maddie, asking if Ranger would visit the children's library or the senior home. It was as if the whole community, shaken by what had happened, now wanted to heal along with them. But the biggest day of all came at the Heroes Among Us festival, a tradition in Freeport, usually quiet, but this year the town square overflowed. Families sprawled on picnic blankets beneath the blooming trees. The scent of barbecue and popcorn drifted on the wind. A stage had been set up under a canopy of blossoms, ribbons streaming from its posts. Natalie stood off to one side, heart hammering, clutching her note cards with numb fingers. David, in a crisp blue shirt, stood by her side, Maddie tucked safely between them, Ranger sitting tall with a new silver medal glinting on his collar. All morning, children lined up to pet Ranger, whispering secrets in his ear or giving him treats. Maddie held his leash tightly, her smile shy but proud. As the mayor took the stage, the crowd fell into an expectant hush. "This year," he announced, We recognize not just courage, but compassion, the kind of vigilance and love that saves lives in quiet ways. He gestured for Natalie, David, Maddie, and Ranger to come up. Natalie's knees shook as she led her family forward, feeling every eye on her. She'd rehearsed a speech, but the words caught in her throat as she faced the crowd, neighbors, friends, people who had become part of Maddie's safety net. Maddie pressed close, Ranger leaning against her shin, anchoring her. Natalie took a breath, closed her eyes for a heartbeat, then spoke. "I'm not the hero of this story," she began, her voice low but clear. "Ranger is." He didn't hesitate to listen when the rest of us might have missed what mattered most. Sometimes what saves us isn't a grand rescue, but the courage to pay attention, to a cry, to a whimper, to a silence that doesn't feel right. I learned that from Ranger, and from Maddie. She paused, her hands trembling, gaze sweeping the crowd. There were days when it felt easier to turn away, but healing happens when we stay, when we listen, even if it hurts. That's what brought Maddie home. That's what brought all of us here. Community, listening, love. The mayor nodded, wiping his eyes. He knelt to buckle the Heart of Courage medal around Ranger's neck, then shook Natalie's hand. "Thank you for reminding us what real vigilance is," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Maddie took the microphone next, her small voice wavering. "Ranger made me feel safe when no one else could. He listens when I can't talk. He stays with me at night so I don't have to be scared anymore." She pressed her cheek against Ranger's head, her words simple but carrying a weight beyond her years. David spoke too, voice rough. "I thought I'd lost my daughter. What I found was a family. People who refused to let her go. People who refused to let me give up. This town opened its heart to us. I can't say thank you enough." The festival rolled on, songs and games, awards and laughter. But in quiet corners, Natalie found herself in conversation after conversation. Parents thanked her for teaching the power of attention. Teachers asked if Maddie might like to join the summer reading program. Even Sheriff Duncan shook her hand, voice soft for once. "You set an example," he said. We all needed the reminder. That night, as dusk turned the town square to gold, Natalie and her family sat together beneath the trees. Maddie clung to Ranger, showing off his medal to a cluster of children who squealed with delight. David wrapped his arm around Natalie, the warmth of his hand grounding her. In that glow, Natalie reflected, truly, deeply, the power of listening and acting, she thought. It's not the big rescues, but the everyday bravery that saves us. Choosing to notice, choosing to stay when someone is in pain. Healing isn't something you do alone. It's a path walked with others, even when you're afraid or unsure. She saw it all so clearly now. Freeport itself had changed. Policies were rewritten. More eyes watched out for the vulnerable. The old barn, once a place of fear, was now the site of summer picnics and laughter, a living symbol of second chances. Maddie, who had once only whispered to Ranger, now beamed at her Nana from across the crowd, waving her medal, surrounded by friends. David, once hollow-eyed with guilt, smiled with a steadiness that was new. Natalie squeezed his hand. "We're all still healing," she said quietly. He nodded. "But we're not doing it alone." The mayor called them to the stage one last time for a photo. Natalie gathered Maddie and Ranger close, David at her side, the crowd applauding as camera flashes sparked. Ranger rested at their feet, eyes half closed, the metal gleaming, Maddie's hand tight in his fur. When it was all over, as stars blinked on over Freeport, Natalie felt a peace she'd never thought she'd find again. Hard-earned, deep as the roots of the old maples. She whispered, "Thank you, Ranger, for teaching us all to listen." He looked up, tail wagging, and in his gentle eyes, Natalie saw the lesson she hoped Freeport would never forget. Summer had come fully to Freeport, flooding the fields with gold and filling every breath with the scent of cut hay and honeysuckle. For the first time in years, the old barn on Natalie's property was alive, truly alive, not with the echo of storms or secrets, but with the sound of children's laughter and the warm scuffle of paws on straw. Natalie stood on the porch in the amber dusk, watching as Maddie darted in and out of the barn's wide-open doors, her hair wild, cheeks streaked with dust. Around her, a swarm of neighborhood kids played hide-and-seek, their shouts rising into the twilight. Ranger sat in the doorway, regal as a lion, tail sweeping the floor as he watched every child with solemn patience. Whenever someone got too rough or a small one tripped, he was there, steady and gentle, a guardian who never missed a thing. It had taken months to transform the barn. Natalie, David, and Maddie had spent weekends sweeping out old straw, painting the walls a cheerful white, stringing up lanterns and bunting until it looked nothing like the cold, haunted place where their story had begun. Now, where fear and loneliness once ruled, sunlight spilled in golden shafts, scattering across hay bales and shelves filled with storybooks, board games, and art supplies. There was even a new corner where Maddie's friends could tie ribbons onto Ranger's collar, each one a small token of gratitude for the quiet hero who'd changed everything. As the sun slid lower, fireflies flickered in the grass, blinking on and off in the humid air. David sat on the steps beside Natalie, shoulders relaxed, laughter creasing his face as he watched Maddie wriggle under a hay bale in search of a hiding friend. "I used to think this barn would always be a place to avoid," he said softly. "Now look at it." Natalie smiled, brushing a fleck of sawdust from her jeans. "It's amazing what happens when you open the doors again, when you refuse to let the darkness win." Maddie reappeared, running full tilt from the barn, the pack of kids at her heels. She skidded to a stop at Ranger's side, throwing her arms around his neck. "You're my guardian angel," she murmured, pressing her face into his fur. Ranger licked her ear, tail thumping, eyes gentle and wise. The other children gathered close, giggling, reaching out to pat his head or slip treats from their pockets. In that moment, Natalie saw what she'd spent so long searching for, a kind of belonging that defied explanation, a sense that the hardest roads sometimes led to the brightest clearings. Inside the barn, Natalie noticed the photos they'd tacked up. Maddie grinning in her first day of school shirt, Ranger with his medal, David and Natalie painting the barn side by side. There was even a new picture, snapped at the festival. Maddie, Ranger, Natalie, and David, arms linked, the Heart of Courage medal gleaming in the sunlight. As dusk deepened, the grown-ups called the children in for lemonade and watermelon. Maddie, sticky-fingered and happy, settled onto Natalie's lap on the porch steps. The stars blinked alive overhead, and the world seemed to hush in the warmth of a perfect evening. Natalie looked out at the barn, glowing with lamplight, and let her mind wander. She remembered those bitter, hopeless nights after Leah's death, the certainty that some wounds would never heal. Yet here she was, wrapped in the arms of a family remade, her heart not just mended, but expanded in ways she'd never imagined. She found herself speaking quietly, more to Maddie than anyone. "I used to think some pain never truly left. But every act of kindness, every brave choice, brought us all back to the light. We did it together." Maddie nodded sleepily. "I'm not scared anymore, Nana." "Me neither, baby. Not when we have each other." David rested a hand on Natalie's shoulder. "Thank you for not giving up, for letting us be part of this." Natalie looked at her family. Maddie, safe and whole. David, present and steady. Ranger, always vigilant. She felt tears rise but let them fall, grateful for every ache, every wrong turn that had led them here. Later, as the last kids drifted home and the porch grew quiet, Natalie turned to those who remained. "We made this barn into something new. It's a promise, to keep our doors open, to look out for each other. Ranger taught us that you don't have to do something grand to save a life. Sometimes you just have to stay, to listen, to care." She looked down at Maddie, whose head rested against her arm, eyes half closed in contentment. "You're my best friend, Ranger," Maddie whispered, not quite asleep. Ranger raised his head, gave a soft, reassuring huff, and settled at her feet. Natalie's heart brimmed with purpose, a lesson hard-earned and now unshakable. Hope and renewal after darkness. The barn, once a place of fear, had become a beacon, a gathering place. Healing had never been about forgetting, but about choosing every day to bring light into shadowed corners. Every act matters. A retired nurse, a wounded father, a lonely child, an old dog. Their small, stubborn choices had changed a life and a community forever. Legacy isn't just the lives you save, it's the love you leave behind. As the evening waned, Natalie stood, calling gently. If this story touched your heart, like and follow our channel. And remember, sometimes the smallest rescue is the beginning of everything new. Be a light in someone's darkness. You never know whose life you might change. She looked out at the barn, alive with laughter and light, and smiled. The future for once felt limitless. End of story. Please like and follow for more stories of hope, healing, and the quiet heroes all around us.